This is a supplemental video to the tax planning video that is referenced in cell AK3. This video discusses how to use the scenario comparisons section of the tax planning spreadsheet. Let me get this part here. This video is brought to you by PolarisInvesting.com, a website for calculating a defensible stock valuation. Recall, business valuation is based on expectations derived from skillful consideration of past facts and future possibilities. The scenarios comparison section is similar to Excel built-in functionality that you can find under the Data tab, What If Analysis, called the Scenario Manager. You can quickly access it through a shortcut by pressing Alt AWS. As you can see, I have the same two scenarios defined under this Excel Scenario Manager that I have here in the Scenario Comparison section. If you look at how you define a scenario in the Scenario Manager, you simply hit Add, but I'm going to go and do an edit. It's very similar. You name the scenario, you indicate exactly what cells on the worksheet that you're looking to have changed, and then you indicate what values. By default it uses the values that are currently in those cells, and then if you double click on an existing scenario, it automatically replaces those cells, those changing cells, with the values that you define for that scenario. Now if you want to look at the output, which down here in the scenario comparison section is shown here on the worksheet, through the Scenario Manager you have to select Summary, indicate what cells contain the results that you're interested in, and then you hit OK, and a new worksheet is created where the output is shown, consisting of the addresses of the changing cells in the results cell, the scenario values, and the current values. Notice the address cells are not very descriptive. You can change the text here in this report, but if you rerun the report again, a new worksheet is created, and you'll have to do that yet again. The scenarios comparison section of the worksheet provides three main benefits over the Excel Scenario Manager. First, scenario interface is tightly integrated with the worksheet, which means that the values are contextualized, meaning that it's in the context of how you're working with the worksheet. For example, the input addresses are clearly labeled. You can go and reference the cells here in the worksheet without moving back and forth between the Scenario Manager and the worksheet. The second advantage is that you have built-in input and output differences. And then the last advantage is that you have built-in best scenario comparison. That requires, first of all, being able to clearly identify the criteria of the best scenario. Now going to demonstrate the use of the scenario comparison section. The current or active values are shown on this row. Values in this row contain both inputs, namely cell A181 all the way through cell L12, and also the outputs, AA4, AA32, and all the way through AI32. Now in this column, cells with a bluish background reflects that the current active values are equal to this scenario that's titled No Conversion. When another scenario is selected, you see that now it changes down here, and it shows that the current active cells are the same as the values that have been recorded for that scenario. If I switch back to no conversion, the active row values change to that scenario. So I'm switching back and forth, and the blue is indicating which is currently active and also whether the current active cells are exactly the same as what has been previously entered for that scenario. Clicking on cell AJ37 will copy the active values down to the currently selected scenario. So in this case, 40 is the row that's currently selected. So when you select this, it copies them to row 40, but because row 40 was selected to be active, these values were copied up there to begin with. Let's copy back down to the same input values. Now if you wanted to copy the active values to a different row, you could put in row like 45 and then select AJ37, and you see down at 45 you get a new scenario called just an active copy. Then you typically come down here and enter a specific scenario name. If you want to clear out a scenario, you can just come over here and select a specific row or a range of rows. But here I'm going to click on that last one. Notice that row stays selected, namely row 45. And then what you're seeing up here is all the active values that are different than the selected scenario. Well, since the selected scenario has blank values, all the values up here in the active row are being flagged as being different than the currently selected scenario. So now let's go back and select another scenario. You see here that these values were copied up, and then the output was generated, and the output and the input match what has been previously entered for this scenario. Notice here over in cell AI 41 currently has got a background of green. Well, what that's doing is it's indicating that this scenario here in row 41 is the best scenario of all the scenarios being considered. And the criteria that's being used for best is what's being called present value of legacy. You can see the value for this particular scenario is larger than the other scenario. So currently it is deemed the best of the scenarios. So now when you've got this no conversion scenario selected, it's showing you up here in these cells the differences between the current active scenario and this scenario in row 41, which is the current optimal scenario. So this no conversion scenario is actually $9,310 less of present value of legacy value than the optimal. So as you create additional scenarios and select them, it'll always compare it to the current optimal scenario. As an option, you can restrict the range of rows that are considered for optimal. So here currently row 39 through row 41 are considered, but if you wanted to narrow that range, you can just select a drop down or enter in a specific row. This is useful when you have many scenarios and maybe you have a subset of scenarios that you're considering separately, and you want to just consider the optimal in that range. Now all scenarios listed will be compared to that optimal row. Once you have your scenarios created, typically you scroll to the left and look at the main part of the spreadsheet that you're interested in, and now you can switch between your scenarios and you can see all the values that are changing. Unlike Excel's Scenario Manager, you're only seeing the specific output values you entered. Here, when you're viewing it right in the worksheet, you can change between scenarios and see how everything in the worksheet changes. Now that we have gone over the scenarios comparison sections, let's review its benefit. The scenarios comparison portion of the worksheet has three main benefits over the Excel Scenario Manager, namely an integrated user interface right on the worksheet, built-in input and output differences, and a built-in best scenario comparison. One more thing to discuss is back here on inputs, that this worksheet that calculates tax-free cash flow for multiple years and calculates the present value of after-tax legacy. There's a lot of values that go into these calculations. What was included over here were the most common inputs that are changed from one scenario to the next. But there are several other uncommon types of user inputs. Uncommon user inputs are Roth, 401k, and IRA distributions. Taking something else besides standard deductions, or taking IRA or 401k distributions outside of required minimum distributions, or entering donations. When an uncommon value is in, a status message appears down here in the lower left hand corner. For example, Roth IRA distribution, see down here a message says uncommon user entries, and it says Roth distribution and the number 1, meaning that one of those kind of values has been entered in. If a second one is entered in, then you see it go to 2. If the values are returned back to what they were, then this message is removed. If a non-standard deduction is entered, you can see here that it shows the number of entries. If a second one is done, it ups the number to 2. If the user were to do a combination of different kinds of uncommon inputs, you see that the different kinds of uncommon inputs are shown in the status bar. Most often, uncommon entries are temporary. and remove before moving on to another scenario. But if an uncommon entry is intended to be recorded along with the scenario, then here in the notes section, type in which of the uncommon values were changed for this scenario. And then when that scenario is selected, you'll need to move over to the notes section, see which other uncommon values were also part of the scenario, then go back and change those uncommon entries for that scenario. Before selecting another scenario, set the values back. Okay, this has been a supplemental video covering the scenarios comparison section of the tax planning worksheet. Thanks for watching.